From the MCADSV office in Jefferson City, Missouri, this is Public Affairs Director Matthew Huffman, and this is Momentum, a webcast produced by your coalition connecting advocates across our state. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and really specifically the history of the shelter movement, both in the U.S. and in Missouri. Today, I am talking with Member Services Specialist Nora Mosby, and special guest Jessica Hill, who is the Executive Director of Safe House for Women in Cape Girardeau, as well as our board member. Jessica, Nora, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, as I had kind of mentioned in the intro, we're going to be talking about Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It is October after all, so timely for us to have this conversation. But I also really wanted us to talk specifically about domestic violence shelters and kind of the history of how that has evolved both in Missouri and the U.S., and then some of the really specific dynamics of the work here in Missouri. I think it's kind of interesting to note that the three of us have all worked in domestic violence shelters, and in the episode last month where I was talking with some other directors at Leadership Institute, I realized that as well, and even made the comment, that could be a whole other episode all on its own, just working in shelter.
Yes.
So this was the perfect opportunity to have that conversation. Mm-hmm. So just to kind of get us started, I was going to do a bit of a history lesson on Domestic Violence Awareness Month and how it first got started. So back in the last century, in 1981, there was kind of the founding of it, and it was a day in October that was called Day of Unity. And so then fast forward to 1987, and it was actually the first time that Domestic Violence Awareness Month was observed. And so we went from having a day of unity to expanding out to the full month to really bring awareness to the topic of domestic violence, and to provide support for survivors and advocates who were helping provide support for them. 2 years later, Congress actually passed a law designating October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And so then we've just seen it evolve from there. And I think that that's a really great marker of social change and social progress that, over the last 3-4 decades, we've seen a really growing amount of support, not just at the grassroots level, but all the way up to the national level. And now we do have an entire month to rally folks around domestic violence awareness. And at some point, we plateau on awareness and we have to move into action. And that's where I'm seeing a lot of work happening now, which I think is really exciting too.
Yeah, absolutely. Just as kind of a side note, I am just kind of wanting to throw out there, have you all heard different reasons for why purple is the color for not only Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but also just the issue of domestic violence or the domestic violence movement?
No, I haven't ever heard that.
I've heard a lot of different theories, but one that I really like is that purple was one of the colors that the suffragettes used. So the color of the suffragette movement was purple, gold, and white. And so the battered women's movement kind of adopted that purple in honor of the suffragettes and the first wave feminists. And I don't know if that's true, but I think it's a really cool explanation.
Yeah. I do really like that history of it.
Yeah.
So I hope that that's true.
Yeah, me too.
Purple's also my favorite color. So yesterday was Purple Thursday, which is, I think, also a growing part of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So I had a whole closet full of choices of what I was going to wear for purple. Some other people, I think, had to kind of dig a little bit, but
how convenient.
Yeah, in our community, it's exciting to see both the awareness of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but now also Purple Thursday as a day that we can really point to visually. And so we had in Cape Girardeau a sort of a social media day, and one of our local banks, one of our insurance companies, the county sheriff's department, the city of Cape, municipal government, they were all posting pictures with their employees in purple and the hashtag Purple Thursday, as well as tagging the Safe House. And so we distributed ahead of time signs that said we stand with the safe house because, and then their employees wrote in, their reasoning for why they want to see domestic violence end. And so it was a really great opportunity to kind of bring the community into that celebration. So
yeah, that is a really great opportunity, and again, such a really amazing marker of social change. So being able to use social media to the benefit of really mobilizing your entire community to not only support Safe House, but the work and the movement in general is really exciting to see that kind of momentum around it.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things that we try to do with Domestic Violence Awareness Month. One is that community outreach aspect and getting more people involved and showing publicly that they support survivors of domestic violence and the work that we're doing. But the other thing that we try to also do then is focus on our clients and show them once again that we support them and that we are proud of the work that they're doing in their own lives. And so we do a dinner at the beginning of the month that also serves as kind of a memorial for people who have lost their lives to domestic violence. And so there's always an aspect of that is more reflective and memorializing that, as well as then celebrating, the progress of our clients and how far they've come. And so we try to do that, as well as, we have some events that are more social and fun. We have karaoke night, and we had a spa day, and just some kind of things like that, special events. And then of course we have our big fundraiser every year is also in October for that reason, because it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So we have a big fashion show fundraiser. It was just last week, and one of the things that we did was purple balloons. We had 1,300 balloons that dropped from the ceiling at the finale of the fashion show, and it was pointed out that, again, purple is the color of domestic violence awareness, and everybody got a purple ribbon when they came in, and just trying to remind folks that when we do our fundraisers, there's always an aspect of it that's fun and social, but we're also spreading that message about the cause and the work and the need for the services that we provide. So
yep.
Did you all do a staff team building activity of blowing up 1,300
We sure did. Yes, we did. And we had volunteers from our community as well who came and helped. You can blow up 1,300 balloons in 2.5 hours.
That's impressive.
Wow,
yes.
That is impressive.
So we have pumps. So the blowing up is not so bad. It's the tying, the knotting of the balloon is what will get you. So, yes.
Yep, I believe it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that sounds like some really amazing work that y'all were able to do down in Cape Girardeau. And again, just really being able to highlight that it is a community-wide issue, and being able to bring in our community partners and engage the full community is such an important part of the month.
Yes,
absolutely.
absolutely.
And I think it's really important for advocates to have an opportunity to kind of step back from the day-to-day grind that can be sometimes really, really difficult and challenging, and to look at the big picture of the work that they're doing and to celebrate successes with other stakeholders in the community. I think it's really important.
Yep,
yes,
absolutely.
And I think especially in the day-to-day of the shelter work that we're doing, given the secure and sometimes undisclosed nature of the work that we do in the shelter, that it can feel isolating.
Yeah.
And so to not only remind ourselves, but then to see it reflected in our community, that we are part of a community network, and that our community is very supportive and becoming more so all the time, is a really helpful part of what we do this month. So
yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, that is a really good point. It can really help to have that connection to a larger movement and a larger part of the community. Because absolutely, sometimes working in shelter can feel really isolating, especially if you're the solo advocate working the overnight shift, right?
Right.
So being able to really celebrate that in community with others is important.
Yeah.
So speaking of shelter work, Nora, I know that you've done a lot of research about history of both the domestic violence movement, but also really specifically about shelters. And so for folks who have been to our office or our training center, we have this really amazing timeline of milestones in the domestic and sexual violence movement here in the U.S. So Nora, I was hoping you could kind of talk a bit about just history of shelters and how they got started here.
Yeah, and I think it's so exciting to talk about the history of our movement and the history of shelters, because it really, I think, provides an appreciation for where we are now, to recognize that so many people gave so much in order to create the programs and the just awareness of the issue that we have now. So I think it's exciting to think about the history and talk about the history and share what we know with each other.
Yeah, and know where it came from, and to be grounded in that history too. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And I think it can almost sometimes give us a way to move forward too. So when I think about the history of shelters in particular, I really want to start just by saying, domestic violence has been an issue in society forever. And just as long as there's been domestic violence, there's always been people who were resisting it and who were supporting survivors. There's always been kind of communities that were coming together to respond to the need that survivors had. So I would say the movement's not necessarily new, but the movement as we know it now really came to us from the second wave feminist movement and the women's liberation movement in the 1970s. And those two movements were really informed by a lot of successes from the civil rights movements of the 1960s. And many of the same people who were involved in civil rights activities were also involved in feminist activities in the 70s, which I think is super cool. And so the women's liberation movement were really fighting for equality for women. It had feminist ideas around gender and equality and equal rights for women. And one of their major platforms became kind of the battered women's movement. And it was just a grassroots effort of saying, violence against women is wrong, and we're going to support survivors, and we're going to do what we can to stop violence against women. And so the movement started as just women helping women, often survivor-led, survivors helping other survivors. It started just kind of with safe homes and people opening up their homes to people who needed a safe night or two. Sometimes I've heard it referred to as an underground railroad of sorts, of just finding safe places for people to go and moving them to safety forever, hopefully. So that was really kind of the beginning of our roots in sheltering survivors, and that moved into more formalized programs. So volunteers became staff and started shelters. The first shelter I've ever heard of, I'm sure, the first shelter, there's all kinds of places that take credit for being the first shelter, but I've always heard that the first shelter was in England. And then in the northern part of the United States in the early 70s, the first shelter in Missouri the first formal shelter, I should say, was started in Springfield in 1976 with Harmony House. And just a couple of years later, we had many, many shelters throughout the state. And that number has continued to grow as time has gone on. And the programs also continue to grow and become bigger and are able to help more survivors and take on kind of more comprehensive kind of work and services. And that's really exciting. But it really started off as just people helping other people, opening up their homes, until these kinds of efforts became more and more formalized. And we also just saw more and more programs throughout the state. And then, of course, MCADP started in 1981, which I can remember because it's the year I was born. So I'm the same age as MCADP.
Oh, yeah. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I appreciate you kind of giving that overview. And something that I want to lift out of that is the recognition that many of these services, before they were formalized, were survivors recognizing a need to help other survivors and creating those grassroots informal support systems. We know that still exists today, but I think it is such an important part of the history, and recognizing that that's really where it got started, was survivors recognizing we need to be helping other survivors access safety.
And it's really so many services exist today that didn't exist. And I think about it personally for my own mother. Like when my mom was my age, she wouldn't have had the same access to domestic violence services that exist today. And it's so incredible and exciting that we've been able to create those services around the state of Missouri in really just one generation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think, as you were talking about survivors helping other survivors. I think we definitely see that in our programs. People who have moved into a safe situation, they definitely want to help. They're highly motivated in helping other people to do the same thing. And so I think that's why when we have peer support groups and those kinds of things, it's so valuable. I think it's encouraging to people who are just coming out of domestic violence situations or recognizing that they're in an unsafe situation and trying to figure out maybe how they could come out of it. To see other people who have done that, and to know that they're not alone. That's one of the things that we try to communicate so much within our community is if you are experiencing some sort of, unhealthy relationship, whether that be through physical abuse, emotional abuse, mental, financial, you name it, that you are not alone. You're not the only one who's experienced this, and we're here to help. And that there are people who want to come alongside you, and help walk with you through that process. And so I think that's a really valuable part of what we're able to do. So,
and I think it's a really important part of survivors' healing is to be able to give back and help other survivors. And then so inspiring for other survivors to see people who have gone through similar things and are doing okay,
Absolutely. Yep. So in Cape Girardeau, our shelter started in 1991. And we moved into a building that had been a group home. And we were in that building for 27 years. Wow. We were in that same building. So we started off very grassroots. And it was definitely the members of the community who cared about people who were experiencing domestic violence came together and raised the funds necessary to open that facility. And pretty much we operated out of that building until 2007 when we opened our outreach office so we could start serving non-residential clients. And we opened a thrift store at that same time. And then we outgrew that building and moved into the outreach office and thrift store that we're in now in 2012. And just this year, just this past June, did we move out of our original shelter that had 17 beds and 1 bathroom.
Oh my goodness.
and moved into our new facility where we have 40 beds and many bathrooms.
Yes.
And we're, completely handicapped accessible and just able to do a lot more things. But I think that our program is reflective of a lot of programs, grassroots effort started by members of the community. That's just grown over time, and that's made possible because of the support of our community and, various grant funding sources and those kinds of things that have also recognized at the local level, the state level, the national level, that there is a huge percentage of the population that's being affected by violence. Yeah. And we've got to do something about it. So.
Well, and I do want to congratulate you all again for being able to open this amazing new shelter. Myself, as well as our CEO, Colleen, were able to come down for the opening. And there was one specific detail that I came back and just kept bragging to people about. And it's that in each room, people can control the temperature in there.
Yeah.
And that is just such a really amazing and specific detail that can mean so much to people is being able to control the temperature in your room.
Yeah.
And so that I thought was just an amazing thing to really pay attention to. And I came back and told everybody.
That's great. Well, I think that we benefited from seeing, the growth and development of so many other programs and the wisdom that they had acquired about the best way, trying to do our best to make people feel not only safe, of course, but also welcome and comfortable, and to give them a sense of as much privacy as possible. I mean, it is a communal living environment, so the privacy might not be what we would prefer, but it is definitely enhanced. And the other thing we're able to do because of the way that we structured our facility is families are able to be in their own rooms by themselves. So a mom and her kids would not have another roommate. That's great. We did that, and then we also have a private bedroom on our main floor, and the other 9 bedrooms are upstairs. So on that main floor, that bedroom has its own bathroom, and we would be able to accommodate a male, which we've had a male client, we've had a male resident already in our facility. somebody who might have a mobility issue or something like that. We've had 2 clients already who used walkers, which is something we would not have been able to accommodate before. And the other thing is if we had a mom with teenage sons who, might just not be great for shared bathrooms and those kinds of things. And so actually in that room right now, there's a mom with a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old son staying in that room. So just the flexibility and, we're just trying to remove barriers, to safety. And I think that we've come a long way. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, and to stick with that a little bit, just in terms of recognizing barriers of people being able to access safety and the evolution of the work, I know that both of you are really passionate about transitional and long-term housing. And so just recognizing that for some people, being able to spend a week in an emergency shelter is life-saving, but it can also be a barrier too, because going into emergency shelter is a temporary solution, and so working toward safe, long-term, stable housing is something that is vitally important to the work too. And so I wondered if y'all could talk a bit about that and just the importance of not only providing emergency shelter, but really working toward long-term stable housing as well.
Well, I absolutely believe that emergency shelter is life-saving and provides life-saving services to survivors. But the reality is sometimes it takes more than 30, 60, or 90 days to rebuild your life. And sometimes that's what survivors have to do after they leave an abusive relationship, is just start from zero and build up. And that can be a long, long process, and it can take some time. And so I think not only having kind of affordable housing, but having support and advocacy during that time can just really be beneficial and can help survivors achieve so much. And so before I worked here at MCADSV, I spent many years working at Lydia's House, and it's a standalone transitional housing program in St. Louis. And during my time there, I really saw survivors achieve incredible just feats. Like, survivors could be there and heal, and after just maybe a year or so, sometimes people would physically look different. Like they just looked stronger.
Absolutely,
sometimes
yes.
You can see that. Mm-hmm. And then just, it was great to be able to celebrate successes with survivors who... I had a survivor who got a master's degree or bought a house or bought a car. You can do a lot with 2 years. You can finalize a divorce, get your citizenship. So it's really exciting to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had a transitional housing program for 2 years now. And it's made a huge impact on our program because, we talk about 2 kinds of interactions that we might have with clients in the social service community. There's the transactional relationship, but then there's the transformational relationship. And some level of transactional relationship is you just have to have it, right? It's, I need to help pay my rent today. Mm-hmm. I need to avoid eviction today, or I need gas to get to work today. And so there's some aspects of that are always going to be in place. But if we can move past that into more of the transformational relationship, that is where, you really do see the change, where you look at a person and you can see, as Nora said, in their physical countenance, you can see the change. And in their situation, you can see the change. And so the more time we have, then the more we're able to invest in that person, and they are able to invest in themselves, which is really what we're all trying to do. And so one of the things that we always talk about is our goals for clients is that they would be safe and sustainable. Mm-hmm. So we're definitely addressing that safety need, right? That is foremost for every single client that we have. But at the same time, sustainability is what leads to long-term safety. Yeah. And so whether sustainability is education, income, employment, and housing, right? Those are the things that lead to that long-term sustainability. And so what the transitional housing program is able to take folks who have gained a measure of safety and stability maybe while they were in shelter, but now they're ready for the next step. And so our program will accommodate up to 15 people And so we're able to place them or to help them because they choose their apartment or house there in the Cape Girardeau community. They are the leaseholder, but we help them with their rent and utilities for 2 years. And so it's just been really amazing to see the things that, as you've mentioned, that people have been able to do within that time. So transportation, of course, is a huge issue in our community as in every other community. And so especially when you talk about like a rural situation, which, we're kind of right on that edge between urban and rural, but we see both types of issues. But anyway, saving for a car is something that we see a lot of, and that is going to contribute so much again to their long-term well-being. Being able to control their own transportation, but there's just a lot of things like that, and this the pride that people have in their home and their accomplishments is just amazing. So we're really grateful to have that program and hope that it'll become a long-term component of what we do. So
absolutely.
I want to also kind of talk about these other intersecting issues. And so mentioning transportation as a barrier, that is something that, as we're talking to advocates at programs across our state, we hear in every single community, regardless of it being urban, suburban, rural. And I remember whenever I was working in shelter too, that especially for families who are having to relocate, if you were having car trouble, if you just needed gas to get there, that oftentimes you might have a family that is living in Kansas City and they really need to relocate to be near family in Poplar Bluff. And they just need help with, I need 2 nights of stay and a gas card.
Right.
And that those are also very real barriers to being able to access safety. So can y'all kind of talk about the dynamics of urban and rural programs? Because I think that it's an interesting mix that we have, right? With Nora, you having worked at a residential program and then a transitional housing program in St. Louis. Columbia being not exactly the metro area that we have of St. Louis and Kansas City. And then similarly with Cape Girardeau, I wouldn't necessarily call it rural, but you're surrounded by very rural areas.
Yeah, our service area includes 2 other counties. So Bollinger County has maybe the lowest or one of the lowest populations in the entire state. So we see unbelievable rural issues there in terms of access to services. And even in Cape Girardeau, which is a community of 40,000, we still see a lack of resources and those kinds of things that play a part in people being able to leave their situation. So.
And I did work at a rural program in Oregon once, a rural shelter. And I just remember how much more that isolation was felt at sometimes. Like people were isolated from support, isolated from resources, even isolated from law enforcement. Sometimes there'd only be 2 officers on duty at a time. And so safety planning looked a lot different, like having to, get really creative about what you were going to do if it's going to take police an hour to show up. And so, I think that element of isolation that survivors often experience can often be very extreme in rural situations. But it has been really interesting for me coming to the coalition and learning about programs throughout the state of Missouri, when most of my advocacy here in the state of Missouri has been in St. Louis, and just seeing some pretty big differences, and also just at the program level. In urban communities, sometimes there's more opportunities for programs to connect with other programs, if they're domestic or sexual violence programs, or just any kind of community service programs. Whereas in rural communities, there's not those same kind of opportunities to connect with other programs or to even refer survivors to local programs. Maybe you're the only game in town.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen it actually kind of work both ways, where our clients might need a resource that we're not able to provide, and there may be only, say, one game in town. Like in the case of Cape Girardeau, maybe there's one or just two. And if for whatever reason, their funds are already expended for the month or whatever the case might be, then there's no one, right? There's no resource. Right. On the other hand, we also see people looking to our agency to provide resources that we may not provide, especially in terms of homeless services. So in Cape Girardeau, of course, there's no homeless shelter. And then there's also no public housing authority. So Cape Girardeau is the largest community in the state that doesn't have a housing authority. So we get a lot of calls of, would you please take in this homeless person?
Yeah.
And, and that's really challenging because, of course, our staff, we're about saying yes, we're bringing people in and then to have to say, I'm really sorry, but we can't accommodate that person. That's just outside of our scope of service, It can be challenging both ways. So, but I do think, as Nora said, the isolating factor of the rural community and the challenges in terms of maybe being able to find employment that pays at a level that where you can pay your bills is an issue. I think transportation, childcare, access to those kinds of things is a real issue, and then, of course, there is the substance abuse. And, of course, that's throughout our state in every kind of setting, but it is something that we see that impacts people, and sometimes access to substance abuse treatment options can be really limited, And, sometimes if you need a specialized service like that, you're looking at having to leave your community. Yeah. And that's something that, we really want to avoid unless a person is unsafe in their community. Then we don't want to see them do that because, again, their work, their children's school, their friends and support structure are all right there. And so, if we can keep them there, that's what we want to do if that's what they would like to do. But when you talk about some types of specialized services, then you are talking about leaving and, trying to get that somewhere else. So
I think one major difference between urban and rural programs is also just that the demand for services is so much larger in urban areas. Like it can just be super difficult to meet those needs when the people that you're trying to serve is just a huge group.
Right.
And so specifically in St. Louis, shelter bed nights shelters run full every single night. And if there is space in the shelter, it'll be gone in 15 minutes. And so just, I think for advocates having to say no, that there's not space in a shelter is really, really hard.
It is,
to do, especially if you have to do it over and over day after day. And then, I think it's also meeting the needs of a very often diverse community where you'll have a lot of needs around immigrant communities or just people from diverse backgrounds, and trying to be able to meet everyone's needs in an equitable way can be another challenge. But can also be very rewarding. So
and it is that kind of both and. We see these challenges every day, and then whenever we do have a success, it is so rewarding and something to celebrate. And hearing both of you talk about that makes me think about the importance of being able to work alongside community partners where they might have a complementary mission and service, but that is part of our advocacy work and systems change too, right? Is being able to coordinate and pull in these social supports and safety nets. So not only with our community partners, but also our sister programs, because just like you were mentioning, Nora, in St. Louis, you might be reaching out to a variety of programs because they offer one service that another program can't necessarily. So do y'all have any kind of tips or recommendations of things that have worked well in terms of coordinating services and working alongside others?
Well, I think in Cape Girardeau, we benefit from a very interactive social service community. And so that is something that we've really tried to work hard to maintain and enhance. And so, the services that we find that our clients most often need, whether it be for housing or substance abuse treatment or child care assistance, those kinds of things, we've really tried to, develop the relationships with those agencies. And one of the things that is a challenge for us is, although we provide in-house counseling for clients, sometimes they need medication to go along with that, or they need to be able to see a psychiatrist. And so we've worked a lot with our community mental health agency to the point now where they are actually prioritizing our clients to get appointments. And, so there's been a lot of work that we've done to try to develop that kind of a relationship with some of the other nonprofits in our community to help them really understand the need that we have and the circumstances that our clients are coming from and why they might want to prioritize them. And then I think they also see that when we're continuing to support that client, they see a better result as well, because our case management services and our support services are helping to wrap around that client in a way that's to the other agency's benefit too. So, and we really try to all play well in the sandbox kind of a thing, and I think that that our community has tried to do some things in terms of even on an operational level, and don't compete on your fundraisers, and don't try to steal away other people's donuts. I mean, there's some things like that may not be directly related to client services, and yet there's a benefit for your clients, by doing some of those things. So,
and I think, Jessica, you kind of already spoke to this, but really participating in those kinds of opportunities to connect with your community partners, if it's like family violence council or any other kind of opportunity to attend community meetings so that you are familiar with people who work in programs, if it's sister programs, DVSV programs, or or other kinds of community service programs. I think having those relationships really helps when you are kind of making a referral to another program. If you can make it a warm referral and say,
Absolutely.
Call the police department or call officer so-and-so.
Right.
They speak Spanish and they can help you. Like it's so much more likely that a survivor will follow through with that referral if you can provide more information about the program and if it's somebody you already have a relationship with and can tell them what to expect. And when I think about, DV and SV programs working in the community, I think one of the biggest challenges is just other programs not understanding our confidentiality requirements because it's foreign to other social service providers. And so I think as much as we can participate in those kinds of community meetings and explain our confidentiality and just explain kind of the reasons behind it, because to us, confidentiality is paramount. We know we have to have it to keep survivors safe. And yet other programs do not understand that. And sometimes I've had programs, other social service providers take it personally and act like I'm just withholding information or something like that, or I'm being difficult. And so if we can have that relationship with community service providers beforehand, they'll understand also our programs and our requirements too.
Right. Yeah, I think there are a lot of sort of educational opportunities like that if you have a good relationship with the agency and the staff, then that opens the door for you to be able to do some of those education type things. So like we've worked with our children's division about, cases where there's an open case where maybe they're considering, a foster care type situation or an out-of-home placement, but domestic violence is involved. And so, what are some of the considerations of that? And, just some things like that. We're really able to advocate on behalf of our clients, but through education, hopefully that will impact future client experiences as well. And the same is true with like law enforcement, and really helping them, especially to understand the dynamics of domestic violence and like why might this survivor not want to file a police report, and why would they maybe not want to come to the house, why you should still respond even if this is the 5th time you've come, all those kinds of things. So actually, as part of our Domestic Violence Awareness Month activity, we actually did roll call with our police department. So every day at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., which is essentially like the shift change, they do what they call roll call at our police department. And so we came in the morning at 7 a.m. and brought donuts, and we came in the evening at 7 p.m. and brought pizza. and then talked about, just a check-in and that kind of thing. But I really do feel like it increases not only their understanding, but also their empathy towards our clients, and helps us all to feel like we're on the same page, So
food can go a long way for
it
building
really
relationships.
does.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
It really does. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I think that is just a really good point of highlighting, Domestic Violence Awareness Month is a great time to raise awareness and bring education to the community. But even outside of just that month, that relationship building aspect has to go on year round.
Yes.
And yeah, when in doubt, bring food, because it's always a safe bet that'll help open some doors, open up conversation.
Yeah. One other thing that I would say that we've done in our community is that there are 4 entities in Cape Girardeau who receive VOCA funds, the Victim of Crime Act grant funds, and that is our local Child Advocacy Center, our local CASA, and then our prosecutor's office. And so we've tried to do some work just within that group and co-host some training. Like we co-hosted training on adverse childhood experiences, because that was something that all of our client groups, were interested in and could benefit from. And anyway, we've tried to do some things around that, because we're all serving victims of crime, and so there's been some great collaboration with that as well. So,
and the other thing that just kind of came to mind was that when you are working with people in the community, there will be difficulties, right? Like, so you can expect difficulties, and I think just be prepared to kind of be an ambassador for domestic violence in a way. Do what you can in that situation to explain why some things are important, why confidentiality is important. And I think as a younger advocate, I just assumed that it was baseline knowledge and everybody should know why confidentiality is important. And I would get angry when people didn't understand, or I'd get annoyed. And I would tell my younger self to just calm down and just kind of be more of a diplomat for the issue.
So that actually leads me to a 2-part question that I have for y'all. Earlier this week, NNEDV, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, this is their week of action. So on Tuesday, they had a Twitter chat. And I stole one of their questions that they asked all of the other participants, because I thought it was a really great thing to kind of dig in a little deeper. And so whenever we take a moment to stop and learn from each other, we can really strengthen our movement. So what is something that you've learned from another advocate? And then what is something that you've learned from a survivor that has really made a difference to you?
I have a couple.
Okay.
Is it okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So, the first thing that comes to mind is I remember, I don't even know how long ago this was, several years ago, I was at a training at Safe Connections. It was called Women's Support and Community Services in St. Louis at the time. And Sarah Buell was there, and she is an attorney from Boston, who's a survivor herself and has worked in the movement for many, many years. And at that training, she talked about the importance of wrapping survivors in services. And Jessica, you talked about that earlier. And to me, it changed my entire approach to advocacy. I just really thought about, I would literally think about how can we connect survivors with a full range of comprehensive services so that all their needs are met. And while they were in my program, what could I do to ensure that after they left, they would have the services that they needed, they would have the support that they needed. And so I've always thought about advocacy after that as connecting survivors to as many resources as possible, and had that visual of wrapping the survivor in services. And so I really liked that. And then, so my foundation in advocacy is from, I started working at the Weinman Center in 2003, and then at St. Martha's. And the women at St. Martha's, the advocates there, I think I learned everything I know about advocacy, but just so many valuable lessons. And I think one of the most important is trusting your coworkers, and that this work is so challenging and difficult. And you have to trust your coworkers in order to serve survivors effectively in order to sustain this work. And those advocates have been there for decades. And so I know it works. I've seen it work. And so I think just trusting your coworkers is really important in this work. And I learned that from the women at St. Martha's.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. I think there's been a couple of things, and they kind of go together. One of the things I think, we've always kind of had the approach that what we're trying to do is empower our clients to self-determine what's best for them. And I think that that maybe at one point, not only in our work, but sort of in case management and social services in general, there was a very prescriptive approach of we're going to tell you how to, fix yourself, right? That, that something's wrong with you and that we're going to tell you how to fix it and you do what we say and then you'll be better. Mm-hmm. And so, we've never had that, or we've moved away from that. We all have as an agency or as a movement, but I think one of the things that I learned was that that we have to be careful that when we talk about empowerment, that that it's still not an issue of we hold the power and we're giving it to you. It really needs to come from a place of the client has the power in their own lives and that they are fully capable in every way of determining what's best for themselves and their children. And so our approach really has to be, information, support, removing barriers, those kinds of things. But we have to be careful that it's not, that we're not still in that prescriptive mindset, and that when a client who's fully informed of their options and makes a decision that wouldn't be what you would choose, that there still has to be respect for their decision and for the reason that they made it, And so I think that that's something that I've learned from advocates and leaders in the movement, is that, that is our role and we should take it seriously. And then I think from clients that that idea of my experience is my own, and only I know everything that has gone into it, and that probably where I am didn't start 2 years ago when I met this abusive person. Probably it started 20 years ago, and all of these things have contributed to it. And this is a person who is extremely complex and fascinating person, right? Yeah. And that they're not by any means are they just the abuse that they experienced. There's so much more than that. Yeah. And so, to see people not as a case or not as a resident or not as a bed, right? But as a person who is 100% capable of everything they want to accomplish in their lives. Yeah. Your clients will teach you that. So.
Yeah. And just to build off that a little bit, when I think about what survivors have taught me and what I've learned, I don't even know where to begin. There's so many things, but I think just the strength that one person can have and the ability that strength can make change happen and can lead to incredible things. I've seen survivors just do so much, oftentimes with very little. And it was just something in them, a drive, like a personal strength and inner strength, a sense of who they were that led them to that. And then the other thing I kind of think of is I remember one time I was working with a woman who was from Colombia, the country of Colombia, and she had cooked a big meal. And I was like, oh, I'm an advocate, I have boundaries. Like, I'm not going to eat this, person's food, Yeah. And I was like, oh, no, I can't eat it. I'm a professional here. And her son just looked at me with this, heartbroken face and was like, but she made it for you. And I was like, okay, I'll eat it. Yeah. So I realized, sometimes, as much as professional boundaries are important, sometimes, especially when you're working with immigrant women, it is important to sit down and share a meal sometimes. Yeah. So.
Yeah, again, food makes a big difference.
Exactly.
It brings us
It
together.
all comes back to food.
Yes.
Yeah.
So another thing that we all have in common is a shared love for NPR.
Yes.
Yes.
And recently I heard a story on NPR as part of their American Anthem series about Gloria Gaynor's song, I Will Survive. They really talked about it being this anthem for different social movements. And one of them was the domestic violence movement. And so kind of an interesting fact that I learned in that story is that the song I Will Survive actually debuted in October. And that it has been a rallying call for many social movements, but I just really loved the way that they talked about it being an anthem for the domestic violence movement, and that Gloria Gaynor has been really outspoken about her own experiences of domestic violence, and what that song means for her too. So I wanted to end the webcast by asking both of you, what is your empowerment anthem?
Do we go first?
Yeah,
or you want to go?
Go ahead.
Okay. So it's kind of a, I don't know, shameless, honest answer, but my favorite go-to empowering song is Dancing on My Own by Robin.
Mm-hmm.
I love that song so much.
Song.
Yeah, like whenever it comes on, I can have a dance party in my car, in my living room, whatever. It's like automatic dance party, and it's just, you know, it's about a woman who's at a club and she sees her partner dancing with somebody else, and it's okay because Robin's just going to dance on her own all night, and it's very positive.
There you go.
Yeah.
So mine is "Roar" by Katy Perry. If you're familiar
Great
with it,
song.
Yeah, another great one.
Yeah. So every year in the spring, we have an event called Beautiful You, and it's our client banquet, and we have a lot of volunteers who come in, and they do haircuts and makeup and facials and nails and chair massage. I mean, you name it, all just so much fun. And so our clients are able to come, and they bring their families, they bring their sisters and their moms and their kids, and a local church provides dinner for us, and we have a great time. But one of the things we do there is karaoke.
Yes.
And so it has now become a tradition that every year when we kick off the karaoke, we sing "Roar" by Katy Perry. And so another staff member and I get up there with microphones and sing it, but everybody sings with it. So, you know, we'll have like 50 women in there, you know, at the top of their lungs singing this song. And so it's a great song, but my favorite line of it says, "I went from zero to my own hero." Mm-hmm. And I just think that's what it's all about for our clients, is self-worth and self-love and self-respect, and things that may have kind of gone by the wayside while they were in their unhealthy relationship, but we're bringing that back, you know, and so it's a declaration of that, and I just love that song, so it's really fun.
I love the idea of you all singing that together.
Yeah, it's
karaoke.
really awesome. It is, yeah. So
That's great.
Well, Jessica, Nora, thank you so much for sitting down with me to have this conversation. I think it was a really great way of rounding out Domestic Violence Awareness Month and just really being able to kind of lift up a lot of the work that's happening around the state.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed being here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
Are you going to tell us your favorite empowering
Oh,
song?
yeah.
Oh, mine was the Gloria Gaynor.
Oh, okay, yeah. It's a great song.
Yeah.
It's a great song.
That was my way of introducing it. Yeah. It's a great song.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I actually think that all three of those are really great empowerment songs for advocates too, as a rallying cry to like keep ourselves motivated for the work too.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew.
All right. Thanks, y'all.